Okay, Chair, we're live on YouTube. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for joining the call. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Any apologies?
Julie Petrie, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Julie Petrie, recorded. Item 2, any declarations of interest other than those already declared?
Yes, Paul, I'm impacted by the exit cap. So when we come to that later on, I will have some observations, but I just want to declare my broad interest.
Thank you, Mark. In light of that, that reminded me that I think actually we're nearly all affected by the exit cap, and if I were to exit, I would be as well. So I'm told. But perhaps we'll need some advice when we get around to talking about that. I think anybody working in local government with any reasonable length of service is particularly affected by that.
Yeah.
Okay. Over to the Secretariat for items 3 and 4. Okay.
Just in the nick of time, admitting one other member. Okay, so thank you. Item 3 is to elect the chair for the forthcoming year. So I'd like to invite nominations from the local pension board.
Can I nominate Paul?
Okay, thank you. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yes, I'll second that if Paul's willing to do so.
Okay, I just want to make sure that Kev can hear us. Kev, can you hear us now? We're just on the election of chair. Paul Evans has been proposed by Martin Hammond and seconded by Councillor Matthews. So I'm just going to ask members for a show of hands. Can I have all those in favour, please raise your hand so I can see it, please? Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. So I won't take abstentions or votes against. Over to you, Chair, for the election of the Vice Chair for the forthcoming year.
Thank you, colleagues. Item 4, to elect a Vice Chair for the forthcoming year. Can I have some nominations, please?
I'm happy to nominate Alan.
Sorry, Mark.
I'm happy to nominate Alan.
I'm happy to second Alan if Alan's prepared to accept the nomination.
That's the wish, yes.
And okay, if we move to a vote, again, if you could make sure we can see your hands, please. Those in favour of Alan being Vice Chair for the coming year. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Item 5, minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of July. Should all have a copy of those. Is it okay for me to sign these as true record of that meeting?
Chairman, they've got me and Julie down the wrong columns on the attendance list.
Apologies for that, Chair. We'll correct that in the record.
I didn't spot that, well done, Martin. Okay, move on. Item 6, Local Pension Board Annual Report. Paul Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I won't spend too long on this because I think members will be more than familiar with the format of the annual report by now. It is effectively a retrospective digest, if you like, of the board's activities over the previous year. Before I get, someone got YouTube on in the background. I've got a bit of a.
I think it's Councillor Matthews is feeding through his microphone, I believe.
Sorry, I'll switch off. I beg pardon.
Okay, I'll as I said, I'll be brief. This is, I think, the 5th annual report that we've produced now for the local pension board, and it summarises the board's activities in undertaking its role and supporting the administering authority over the past 12 months. It will, as you can see there from page 9/19 on your printed agenda onwards for the work programme, there's quite a lot of ground that the board have covered over the previous year, and also some detail on what it will be covering over the forthcoming year. Although, of course, we're going to go into a new world of local government. The operation of the board and its terms of reference aren't likely to change significantly throughout that period. This is due to be reported to Northamptonshire County Council for the last time in February 2021. After that, my understanding is that the pension functions will be provided by the West Northamptonshire Authority on a hosted basis. So future reports will go to that authority. Happy to take any questions from board members. Oh, and just a caveat, obviously, the report will need to be updated following this meeting, as obviously there's quite a lot on the agenda that we will need to reflect in the report. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Anyone with any questions, observations? Everybody okay with that? Okay, thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Move
Hope
on.
the report is easy to read and accessible, but welcome any comments offline if anyone has any.
Okay, we move on. Item 7, action log, down as Joanne Walton, but I noticed the action log is actually blank, so I don't suspect this will take long. Is that the case, Joanne?
Yep, nothing to discuss. Perhaps there should be some actions. Perhaps there will be some after today's meeting.
Okay, thank you. Item 8, pensions administration performance report. Again, over to Joanne.
Michelle's going to take this one.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the standing item of the administration of the fund. Nothing really to point out in the report. Just the usual under section 4, the breaches of the law, just one very small non-material breach there, as you can see. Also, just to draw your attention in the main report to the IDRP cases that we've got going on at the moment. It just lists the 4 there, either that have got a resolution or are still ongoing. Just to mention on 6.1, that's the resolution of unprocessed leavers. Mark will discuss that more in the business plan. We'll have a bit of further information on that for you under that item. So drawing to the appendix of the report, the main thing really to draw your attention to is on Appendix 1 with the key performance indicators. So as you can see there, under the payment of retirement benefits from active employment, for September there is a red KPI flag there. And from the pension of benefits for deferred membership status, the one just under, there's an amber there. And as you can see from the notes at the bottom of the report, unfortunately, the service did lose 3 working days in September due to some technical issues, and that is the explanation for both of those. But as you can see, all the other KPIs are satisfactory at green. No concerns on the contributions element of the report, and nothing further to add on the private appendix, but obviously happy to take any questions if you have any.
Anybody got any questions or observations? And I just remind you first that we will need to go into private session if you want to discuss items on the pink papers on the appendix.
Yeah, I do have a question about the papers, Paul, but we can wait until we get into the exempt at the end of the meeting, if you like.
Okay, if everyone's okay with that. Okay. Thank you. Then we'll move on. Item 9, business plan update. Mark Whitley.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I will spend some minutes going through this, but I'll pause at the end of each section to see whether you have any comments. Because we have, it's fair to say, some of these activities were in a state of transition when we drafted this version of report. They've subsequently moved on. So turning first to the service delivery section, and the first 2 items, the business continuity plan and cybercrime, we're reprofiling both of these essentially. The business continuity plan, we're putting the emphasis on the fact that we had to undertake a rapid review of the BCP in advance of lockdown. And now because of the pandemic and the timelines being pushed and the fact that NCC will be abolished, and as has been mentioned, we'll be moving to West Northamptonshire. It seems prudent to actually take that into account in this plan. So we're putting some activities after the West Northamptonshire comes into being on the 1st of April, and doing what we can before then. But as I say, reflecting on the fact that we did have to undertake a full review of the BCP immediately before lockdown, to make sure we could work remotely and all those kind of things. The cybercrime is the other one that has also slipped. The entire service has undertaken mandatory training, in this area. Senior officers are undertaking a lot of strategic training on this, and so we will be quite considerably changing the timeline on this plan. We're looking to undertake a scorecard assessment this financial year to see where any weaknesses are, but the emphasis clearly is on trying to do everything we can to make sure nothing does go wrong. But of course, you can't stop everything in this area, as you can appreciate. But then understand, what protections are there, and of course, it does link into the BCP as well. So it's just a few words around those two. The last one in this area has been completed, which is the admin payroll software extension. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions on those three. I'll continue.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. The GMP one, you're aware, is the delays have been due to initially to HMRC providing the data. They have now provided, so ITM are working to a particular schedule on that one. Joe, it is the limits of the timelines are being pushed, but I think we now have a 1-year extension on the software we're required to do that, don't we?
We do now, yes.
So we're slightly more relaxed about that, but that one was only delayed because we obviously didn't get the data from HMRC, but now we've got a sensible timeline to complete that. Moving on to the comms section, you're aware we've been working quite a lot around the digital strategy review, so that's progressed well, so nothing further to add there. And finally, on this section, implement multiple investment strategies. We are going to the pensions committee with an analysis of where we are to date at the December meeting, and we're looking to undertake some further modelling work, but we need the agreement of the committee in order to take that, which obviously has a cost. But that is now progressing in a measured way to do a very thorough review of whether that would be appropriate for scheme employers. So just for clarity, multiple investment strategies is where there might be different buckets of employers who might want a less or more risky investment strategy that's better for them. I'll pause there to see if there are any questions around those three.
Anybody? No. Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Thank you. Operations. The undecided leavers Michelle mentioned. We are undoubtedly have not made as much progress as I would have liked at the beginning of the year, or sorry, when I drafted this particular activity a couple of months before the turn of financial year. But of course, we didn't know what was around the corner at that point.
We've had 3 parcels from Dunelm.
Oh, sorry, Paul, you're on.
We've had the Bath thing.
Paul, you're not on mute. Sorry. Thank you. So unprocessed leavers, we were hoping to have 5,000 cases, including business as usual, at the end of the year. That's probably just a couple of thousand over business as usual. Where I think what we're targeting now, and we'll revise this this target in the next iteration of this, is we're targeting 7,500 by the turn of the year. Which will be, that's a few thousand over business as usual. So a bit slower due to the inefficiencies of working remotely. Aon weren't able to get up and running as quickly doing their little bit of this activity. And we've also had some quite considerable influxes in, and basically our software, also a particular tool we need to process them was actually disabled due to a sort of like an issue with that particular aspect of the software. So that's where we're going with that one. I think the next one I don't have any comments on. That's just giving you sort of an indication of where that project is, working through all the potential refunds. I'll pause there just to see if there's any questions on those two.
Martin.
Given government reform only a few months away, is your undecided leaver caseload actually going to start going back up again after April?
Yeah.
Therefore, are you going to be chasing your tail if you're not careful?
It will. So what we expect to happen when on the 1st of April is the month before we will get a whole load of employees, thousands and thousands, notified as leavers. And then the following month, they'll be notified as new starters. We will be sending a communication out, which basically says, we'll be joining your two records together unless you tell us you don't want us to do that. And we'll give some examples as to what that means in terms of pounds and pence and financial impact and all the other factors people need to take account in that decision. So the question I've posed to Corey is, what is the most efficient way of dealing with that? It is because if we're not careful, what we'll have is our number of leavers will go up by a few 3,000-4,000, and we won't process them at the other end and join them together. So we just need to make sure we are as quickly as possible joining those together so it doesn't have the impact you described. Because yes, I think it's fair to say that very often when our numbers spike like they have recently, it's because they've come in en masse and we haven't had the ability to actually deal with that influx. So we're aware that influx will be there and we'll try to resource accordingly. But yes, a good question. Okay, if you're ready, I'll move on to really, I think the next section is investments. And really, I think that's just a reporting a success story of activities that have been undertaken, are on time and, or are completed. The one which, the last one on the list, INV7, I don't mean that one, sorry, INV3, which is the continued development of the asset pool. There were some delays at the top project level there because a lot of funds like us, for example, were unsure at the start of the pandemic as to what resource would be pulled, what sickness levels we would have, whether we would have to help more widely with the COVID response. And therefore, some funds wanted to delay the timeline of sub-fund implementation. That handbrake has now been taken off, and we are moving forward. And indeed, the first Majidi moved into the pool just last week. So that was the first of the new sub-funds launched. The rest will continue through the financial year. The other aspect you will be aware of, I think, from previous discussions is around insurance. I won't touch on that here because that is something that Paul can discuss under the confidential item, but it did also slightly delay the progress. Aside from that, I think the investment activities are very much a good news story. Again, I will pause. That is all I have to say on the report. So any further questions?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you.
Move on to item 10, risk monitoring report. Michelle, please.
Thank you. So this is the standing risk monitoring that the local pension board reviews every meeting. If we just draw your attention to section 2, under 2.1, we haven't identified any significant changes to the risk register, but there are 3 points there of mitigations that we've updated just to strengthen the risk register. So as you can see, the first one there on the cybercrime, obviously being a key thing at the moment. We've added the word annual in there on the training element of cybercrime. That's really just to demonstrate that we are aware that it's an ongoing changing thing, and officers are kept fully up to date on an annual basis, rather than the original wording that made it sound like we did a one-off training course and didn't revisit that. On the second point, there's actually a typo there, I do apologise. It's actually risk 19, an additional control has been added, just again to strengthen the valuation risk there, and just to ensure that we've got that one covered as fully as we can do. And again, on the third point on risk 21, what we've done, we've just updated the actual risk descriptor in this case, just to demonstrate that we do obviously work in conjunction with the fund actuary and specialist advisors on these matters, and all decisions are taken with full knowledge and considerations. So that's the actual changes made to the risk register. As you can see under section 3, we've put this section in a few meetings ago about the short and medium term risks, the ones where we don't necessarily want to keep updating the main risk register because we want to keep that high level, but things that are going on at the moment. So the first section there just talks about how we've basically adapted to the pandemic, and what we're doing differently, just to be able to keep in communication with our members. And as you'll see under section 3.2, there's just a bit there about the exit cap and the cloud and the impacts that both of those are going to have on the service for the short to medium term. Just to mention for both of those, Jo has got papers on both of those coming up shortly, so she'll go into the detail on those, but we just felt it was appropriate to mention them as a risk because obviously of the resourcing issue. So that's all I needed to say on the paper. Obviously the full risk register is up for review from yourselves. If you've got any additional comments, we'd be more than willing to have a look at those as well. Thank you.
Questions, anybody?
Just a curiosity one. The voicemail facility, was it much used?
Sorry, the voicemail.
Voicemail in 312. Was it?
We don't, well, myself don't know the full extent. I do know that we have been passed on messages though from the voicemail function for exercises that we've been undertaking in governance. So from a personal perspective, I think it has been well used, but we'd probably have to go back to the operations team to for a broader thought on that.
Yeah, the voicemail, it's receiving just a few a day, so it's not a huge volume, but it is clearly required, because if people have no other way of accessing our services, then that's what's needed.
I suppose it struck me that you might end up being a permanent facility, really, even after we've been and gone, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking for a soft telephony solution to be put in as soon as possible, because that would be the ultimate solution. Responding by email is clearly slower than using a telephone.
And have you had any experimentation with web chatting? Whether that would be worth doing?
We have. Sorry, I've just getting a lot of feedback. I'm not sure who from. Okay. Yes, sorry. We have been involved in a look at a sort of, if you like, a help desk solution, which has more bells and whistles and perhaps the one we would immediately is most pressing to get in, which would include that certainly. I think it's worth recognising that whilst we do get lots of calls, we don't have if you like, a formal help desk in the traditional sense within pensions. It is a number which then gets diverted into hunt groups. So our most pressing concern was to try to immediately replicate that. That clearly has been an issue, because not only has our service not been able to replicate that, other areas haven't either. But beyond that, it's looking at whether actually, a fuller help desk would be of benefit to the pension service. So I think we're looking at the two avenues at the moment.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Could I just say one word, Paul, please? Sorry, Chairman, about the that number 19 and the wording and what it means. Because it's regarding the risk. Actual experience materially differs from actuarial assumptions used at each valuation. And what we're saying, I mean, it says probability-based or stochastic modelling techniques are used by the fund's actuary to reduce the reliance on deterministic assumptions. What that's basically saying is that we use that funnel of 5,000 different scenarios. And we're not just relying on one version of the truth. So the old style deterministic approach would be, you use a single set of assumptions, you work out what your assets, well, you know what your assets are, you work out what your liabilities are, you work out what the deficit is, and then you have a recovery period. It was there's only one version of the reality going forward. Now 5,000 are modelled, so you should have a better chance of having the right amount of contributions coming in from scheme employers. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Move on. Item 11, Governance and Compliance Report. Joe Walter.
Thank you. I have a presentation to deliver, which represents section 4 of this report. So what I thought I would do, and bearing in mind it's may take a bit of time, and it's quite important. I was just wondering if anybody has any questions on the remaining items in the report, excluding question 4, item 4, because I'll cover that at the end. I think that's a no.
Yeah. All my questions with item 4.
Okay, lovely. So I'm just about to share my screen. Bear with me. Sorry. Right, can everybody see that? So that was a yes also. Mm-hmm. Good. Right, so section 4 of this report covers the recent exit payment reforms that have come out from government. I'll go through this in a bit of detail. Not sure where everybody, obviously from the start of the meeting, I know a few people are up to speed on this, but there may be some members that are not so. So as a bit, sorry, I'm just going to hide my view here. Right. Okay, so the public sector exits cap started back 5 years ago in 2015, when the government announced plans to cap exit payments in the public sector to a value of £95,000, and that included pension strain and any redundancy payments. 4 years passed, and HM Treasury released a consultation on draft regulations, guidance and directions. And then another year and a bit passed, and the Treasury produced their response to the consultation. That was in July 2020, where the cap remained at 95k, given the passage of time of 5 years that hadn't increased, and also the cap would never increase, in that it's not index linked, so it would take a change in government policy to increase that value. The cap includes statutory redundancy payment, severance payments, pension strain, and any other payments made as a consequence of termination of employment. Just for clarity, pension strain is the cost payable to the scheme by the employer for releasing someone's pension without reduction earlier, that would have been done if they're not left on the grounds of redundancy. Pension strain can vary from a couple of hundred to 1,000 up to as much as £300,000. Let's say £300 is the top either, but that's the kind of difference we have in pension strain, and it all depends on how long, how much service the member had, what their salary is, and how far they are away from retirement when they're made redundant. Treasury announced that there would also be relaxations and waivers available to scheme employers, so that the exit cap wouldn't apply, but that's not something from a pensions angle that we have too much to say on that. So it's down to the employer to enact those. Then on the 15th of October, the restriction of public sector exit payment regulations were signed and became in force on the 4th of November 2020, so a few days ago. So that was all fine, except for the fact that on the 7th of September 2020, MHCLG released a consultation on reforming local government exit pay within, obviously, local government. So there's a bit of a narrower field than the whole of the public sector. That consultation closed on the 9th of November, and you would have seen our response to that. That was circulated a few weeks ago. Within that consultation, the proposals were that a redundancy package would be limited as follows: maximum of 3 years per week of service, maximum 15 months of pay, maximum salary of £80,000, and total cap of £95,000 on all forms of compensation. So on the 14th of October, MHCLG released the draft regulations to facilitate these proposals. That consultation has been extended to the 18th of December and expected coming to force in 2021. As you may have heard, that the draft regulations weren't worded particularly brilliantly, so there's quite a bit of work to address those. That will be featuring in our consultation response on that. I should pause there. Are there any questions so far? I can't see anyone, so I assume that's a no. Okay, so where we are now is that we have a conflict in the regulations. The public sector exit payment regulations came into force on the 4th of November, but the current LGPS regulations have yet to be amended, and we don't expect them to be amended till January at the earliest. So we're at a bit of a conflict as to what we should do if we are facing a retirement of a scheme member whose total exit package exceeds £95,000. So what we have potentially is that a member could reasonably expect to receive their pension paid without any reductions because the LGPS regulations aren't in force. But we may not be able to do that because the gist of the public sector exit payments regulations may suggest that the cap should apply in those instances. So it's not just localised to us going through LGR, the whole of the country is facing this issue in the world of local government. So on the 28th of October, the MHCLG Minister issued a letter providing a view on how administering authorities should proceed. And that is basically the gist is paying benefits in line with the exit payment regulations 2020 with no consequence on the, so effectively paying reduced benefits rather than benefits without a reduction. On the 30th of October, the Scheme Advisory Board issued the QC opinion that they received on the conflicting regulations, and they said that that their advice is that we should be paying. Well, I've moved to that slide. Bear with me. So I'll cover it here. So the SAB are recommending that the administering authority should offer a deferred benefit or a fully actuarially reduced pension, and that the scheme employer should delay the payment of any or the cash alternative values, which obviously is a different view to MHCLG. So what we've done is we've gone and sought independent legal advice that we have seen a draft copy of, and it does concur with the Scheme Advisory Board view. We'll be issuing some information on that to scheme employers in the next couple of days or so. There's also a matter of challenges from scheme members who would be expecting to receive their benefits paid in full without a reduction. How should we be dealing with them? Will we get an influx of internal dispute resolution procedure cases? And the Scheme Advisory Board are asking Pensions Ombudsman whether it's possible to bypass the IDRP process and take it straight to them for review. We haven't heard any more on that yet. So what I'll move to, so from 2021, when hopefully all the regulations are in line and we know what we're doing, and there is no query on that, we've got some slides here which shows the effect on members' benefits pre and post the cap. So I'll move to this slide here. I won't go through these in lots of detail. Probably the best line to look at is the bottom line of each column, where it shows you the current value of package to the member and what the future value of the package, redundancy package to the member is. And as you can see, it varies quite differently. So for this person, it's an example of, I'll move on. Sorry, so example B, where a member does exceed the 95k cap. That's the best slide to look at. So we have somebody in the past who would have received immediately unreduced or partially reduced benefits, their past package would have been to a value of £138,000, but with a cap that's limited to 95. And if the member took the option of a deferred pension, but receiving their statutory redundancy and discretionary redundancy pay up to a value of 95k, you can see the difference in the package cost there. It goes from 138,000 right down to £35,827. So these regulations are having quite an impact on the benefits that members would receive compared to what they would have been pre 4th of November 2020. So that's a brief overview of where we are at the current time. Any questions on that?
Hello. Yeah.
Sorry, Kev.
Yeah. So from what you're saying at the moment, this is kind of almost unenforceable because the next part of legislation isn't in place to enable it to happen. So if anybody was made redundant right now and this cap was enforced, it can't be enforced. Is that the gist of this?
MHC LG disagrees to that.
Okay.
Scheme Advisory Board think the opposite. This is the conflict that we have.
So have you, I take it you've not had a live case yet come through to see?
Not as far as I'm aware. That's true, isn't it, Mark? You're on mute.
Yeah, so the scheme, we've not dealt with one which is we believe exceeded the cap. But there's a host of things going on here, because one of the key principles, the strain cost tables that we've used to date have been put in place entirely for the purposes of working out what money needs to be paid by a scheme employer in order to fund the benefits. They've not been designed at all for the purpose of effectively working out member benefits. And so there's two things which are important there. One is they're not unisex factors. And secondly, they have an appropriate degree of prudence for the purpose of getting funds from the scheme employer. In other words, for scheme member benefits, they're overly prudent, and so the factors we're using, we're getting a new set that we can use for this purpose. So that's the first thing, and that's before the GAD factors come in, because the GAD factors are still under consultation effectively. So we wouldn't, even if we wanted to, as of today, be able to work out what the appropriate strain cost is to feed into that 95k calculation. We'll very shortly have those, but we do believe because they're removing some prudence, we believe that they will produce lower strain costs than the current factors we use. So that's a positive from a scheme member perspective, but it does mean we've got a slight delay. The second thing is SAB have obviously the Minister has sent a letter which says one thing. SAB have said, well, effectively that it's a more complex legal position than the Minister has said, but ultimately agrees with that line of thought, with the exception that they don't believe the employer should make a payment with regards to the cap until they understand what the ombudsman process would look like. And obviously, we can see the regulations that are in black and white. We know what they say, and we're aware they conflict. So we have taken collectively with a host of other funds some separate legal advice, which we're expecting to come through this week, just to see whether the SAB position is the appropriate course of action in the interim. So you're right to say there's a conflict. It's fair to say that you've got two things which, in some situations means you can't reconcile, what you need to do. But it's not fair. It's not fair to say you can just follow the LGPS regs in isolation because they haven't been changed, because that would result in you breaching another bit of the law. Yeah. If someone exceeds the cap. So in a roundabout way, I think that probably answers your question, in that we're getting legal advice. We can't say right now what it is, although we're aware of what it is likely to be, but that should be being finalised in either today or tomorrow.
Okay. So, but what I was getting at is currently, as it stands, if somebody was being made redundant and you needed to sort out their payment right now and they were covered by this exit cap, there wouldn't be a mechanism in place to be able to work it out and pay it effectively. It'd have to be worked through an ombudsman and some legal challenges first. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. I mean, so someone, if we use the new tables and it produces a figure which is below the cap in totality, so the scheme employer is the responsible party for, you know, we give them the strain cost and they work out whether the individual exceeds the cap, or indeed if the cap applies to them, of course, depending on their position, their situation. If they don't exceed the cap, we process the benefit as normal. If they exceed the cap, then that's when we have this issue regarding the conflict, and we need to But I think your summation of the situation is fair.
Okay, thank you. Cheers. It's an impossible situation, really, isn't it, until it gets clarified? So
yes, there's a transitional period of at least a few months where it's a very difficult situation. But we can only, you know, we have simply take advice so we can operate in the law the best we can.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you.
Obviously, timing of this is deeply unhelpful with local government reform, because we're likely to be identifying redundancies as a result of that during the course of the next, 3 months, I suppose, next 2 months in some cases. So, you know, that's going to be the real problem. And we'll come back to comms later on, but clearly there's a lot of complicated communications you've got to try and get over to our membership here, haven't we? Michelle, were you going to come on to 4.2.6 in your report shortly?
Did you mean me?
Sorry, Joe, yeah, sorry.
4.2.6. Well, I kind of covered that in the remaining slides for the presentation. That's probably not the biggest issue at stake at the moment, but yeah, they were in the last 3 slides of.
Yeah.
Did you have a specific question?
Yeah, just ask a question then, really. So I understand what obviously the statutory redundancy is, and the discretionary redundancy payment. What is the discretionary additional lump sum payment?
I think that's the multiplier that's used in. I think some employing authorities have different multipliers. Some are just the one. I've seen some places where there's 2. NCC is 1.5.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So am I right in thinking that the effect of what you've described in 4.2 is that they've effectively made early retirement as a consequence of redundancy pretty well history? I'm
not sure if that's a political answer to that. It's an employing authority thing more than it is a pensions issue. It's probably how I would answer that.
If I could have a stab, I would say clearly there is very often a significant gap between the non-pension elements of redundancy, i.e. the actual redundancy payment itself, and 95k. So I mean, there is quite a bit of scope for still significantly enhanced pensions and whatever otherwise would be the case payable in 55 plus. But clearly, it's it's impacting everybody to some degree, albeit obviously if you're talking about just a statutory redundancy payment coming off, then that's obviously very different from someone potentially losing effectively 100,000 plus worth of benefit if they were a particularly high earner. But that's the way I'd probably answer that, to say it's still 95k's worth of cost to the scheme employer.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I've finished unless anyone has any other questions.
I think, as Martin pointed out, we're already identifying tiers 1 to 3 redundancies at the moment, aren't we, which are high earners. So this is going to be interesting over the next couple of months to see how this unfolds, really.
Yes, but someone did mention communication. I think the key thing is at the very least, we we need to be able to do is to actually give the the financial impact to those individuals. And so we're working as fast as we can to be able to get to that position, even if some individuals have been given numbers in the past. We need to, it's fair to say that some, the exit cap total, the cost due to strain cost, that may be slightly suppressed, as I've indicated, to bring it more in line with what the GAD factors will be going forward. So it does mean there might be people on the cusp of being affected who now are not. But I think if we were to follow the SAB route, clearly that has a whole host of impacts beyond where we thought we would be, let's say a couple of months ago.
It's like an interesting thing that you need right at the moment, Mark, isn't it, in the middle of local government reform and everything else?
Yeah.
I think as well, Kev, we've got to not lose sight of the fact that this isn't just high earners anymore.
No,
these
it's not.
proposals
No.
will hit people earning plus 30,000 a year with 20 years service. Will get caught out by this.
Exactly, mate.
As you say, right where they're trying to reform the workforce, it's going to be nigh on impossible looking at the rules.
I think it is, isn't it? Yeah.
On a purely practical format here, bearing in mind this is going to involve an awful lot of work for the pensions team overall, it would appear, do you have enough resources and experience to actually cope with, not experience, but experienced people to cope with it? I mean, do you need extra resources?
I can't see how we don't need extra resources over the come, and we're looking at the business planning for the next financial year. We obviously, if we need anything immediately, we'll put it in. This affects, whilst you're right to say there's LGR in Northamptonshire, it impacts Cambridgeshire quite clearly as well. So, an extra body or two to help to deal with this is not going to have a huge impact on the fund resourcing. So we would just put that in if required. So I need to have obviously a chat about this. But one thing I would say is we're trying to do everything on system as much as we can. So any decisions we're taking, particularly if we know there are potentially hundreds of calculations to do, we need for as long as possible our system to be able to cope with doing those calculations. And so anything we're trying to do this is being done on system as opposed to off system. But yeah, very, very good question. And I think the business planning for next year and the year beyond is going to be very complicated because of LGR, because of the wider reforms around exit cap and what's coming next year, but equally McLeod as well.
Yeah. So just on comms then, I can't remember which report it was now, but further on the agenda, there's the comms plan, which sets out doing something, I think in February, and I wonder whether that needs to be brought forward.
This is for LGR, sorry.
Well, no, about exit cap and the implications of exit cap and indeed McLeod on the redundancies that may well flow from reorganisation.
Yes, so right, so we've obviously been doing a huge amount of communication on exit cap with scheme employers, and then that's concentrating on those members impacted. So the scheme, because in many ways, this is as much as an admin authority issue, it's clearly an employer issue. In many ways more so, because the onus is on the scheme employer to work out whether the exit cap applies, and whether the individual exceeds the cap. We then, and this is rather a simplistic position, but we then process the benefit accordingly to that information from the scheme employer. So, however, when there's a regulatory change, which there isn't yet, but when there's a regulatory change to the LGPS regs, we always have to take a view: is that something which needs communicating? And clearly, down the path we'll have to do that. The reason for February is to time in for the LGR. So we will effectively be giving that, if you like, option to individuals, or explaining that their records will be amalgamated and they can keep them separate at that point. And playing into that will be things like, well, redundancy. if someone keeps their benefits separate, as you can imagine, they get made redundant from the job later down the line as part of workforce reorganisations, they will get very different benefits if they've kept the benefits separately compared to if they bring them forward. So we have to kind of look at things holistically. So that's the rationale for the February date. It's to be just before the restructure, but equally after we've got the information from the scheme employers to be able to actually communicate it.
Okay, I understand the logic. I suppose I'm just thinking, in particular, the tier 1 to 3, at least on the timetable we've been shown, people will have either got or not got a place in the new structure by then. So for those people, probably more, that's leaving it after the point at which some of them will need to start making decisions about whether they apply for a tier 4 job, for example, or whether they take redundancy, etc. And
yes,
make those decisions without knowing. And it's really difficult for anybody to do that at the moment. But I'm just flagging up that there's there's a bunch of people who are going to be caught by the timings of all this.
Yeah, I mean,
if I can come in there just quickly, Mark. We are communicating with employers quite closely on this. So I've already sent a number of emails out directly to the HR leads and the financial leads within the main councils, who are going to be the employers that are at most risk of having people caught here. So we are communicating closely with them. There will be another communication coming out in the next couple of days once our legal position is confirmed. And our advice in those communications is to have those discussions with the affected employees. So I think that targeted way through the employer is the most efficient at the moment.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's what's planned.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one-to-one. I mean, I'm on that list of affected, tier 1 to 3 as well. Actually, is the pension services being looked at that early? But there's every individual there is given a one-to-one discussion, and I think once we've communicated the the position of the admin authority and what the recommendation, if you like, if there's any employer aspects where we need to make a recommendation, then once that's been communicated, and I would expect that to be played back to those individuals affected on a one-to-one basis.
Okay. Thanks.
Can I just say something, Paul? I'm ever so sorry. I've got to give my apologies. I've got to go in a couple of minutes because I've got an urgent Children's Trust meeting that's come up at 11 o'clock. So I'm just giving me apologies now, Paul.
Okay, thanks, Kev.
Right.
Okay, I think unless anyone's got any discussion, we seem to be straying from 11 into 13. Perhaps we should move on to item 12. Sorry, to item 12, the age discrimination remedy in McLeod, and then we'll get into communications proper. So Joanne, please, number 12.
Thank you. As you remember, the exit cap has taken over a bit since we did the consultation response for McLeod, but McLeod still remains quite a big issue for us to come 2021, and then after that too. So this is a report just to give you an idea of where we're at and what challenges we're going to face in the application of the remedy that's been proposed by MHCLG for those members affected by the underpin. So this report, I won't go through in too much detail. I'll focus on the practical impacts, but the report covers in section 2 the proposed remedy by McLeod. I don't propose to go through any of that in detail because it's a bit technical, and the more important side is how we actually implement the remedy. So what we've done, and this was prior to the consultation consultation actually being released, was in June, we enlisted our benefits and governance advisors, Aon, to have a look at our scheme data and see how many people might be affected by the proposed, by the remedy, as we thought it was at that time. And as you can see in table 3.2, their analysis showed that 19% of the scheme membership may well be affected by the remedy in some way. And I say in some way because we don't at this stage know the financial impact for each scheme member. It could be pounds and pence, it could be hundreds of pounds, it could be thousands of pounds, but we're probably thinking at this stage it's probably on the lower amount that people may benefit from. But it doesn't mean that we can't not look at those records. and 13,000 scheme records as it was at that point. It may be more now, it may be less, depending on the proposals and how they turn into legislation. That's quite a bit of work that we'll have to undertake. And just for a bit of further analysis, Aon looked at the employers that were most likely to be affected within the scheme, and it's no surprises that the more established councils as types of employers have come up on top of the list there, with Northamptonshire County Council currently has the biggest membership, so it's most likely that most members will be affected in that, followed by Northamptonshire Police and then Kettering Borough Council. But then there are 360 other employers within the scheme where 8,000 people could be impacted. So it's spread wide and far, it's fair to say. What I might move to now, in the interest of presenting as well, is the Appendix One, which is on my pack, page 87. And what we've done, we've looked at all the things we need to consider to implement the remedy once we're in a position to do so. The first important part is data collection, in terms of making sure we have recorded all the hour changes that all the affected members have had within that period from 1st of April 2012 to 31st of March 2022. We are one of the fortunate funds that has been collecting data. We didn't stop on the 1st of April 14 like some other funds did. Because of the care scheme, you don't actually have to record the hour changes. But we carried on doing it, or at least we believe we've been doing it based on the information that employers have given us. It may be the case that not every employer has given us every single hour change. So part of our project that we'll have to undertake is to establish whether we are holding the right hours. We're still thinking of the best way to do that. We don't want to put too much work into making sure that we are holding hour changes for everyone, and then end up with a big complicated piece of work to do, comparing and contrasting what we already hold. So we're working through that. So I think Kev's saying goodbye, is he? Yeah, bye Kev. So that's a piece of work that Corey's team are currently looking at as how to manage that effectively. We have had some of our some organisations within the pensions industry show an interest in how we could make that work more efficiently from a technological point of view. But we're seeing what is the best way forward on that. What has happened is the Scheme Advisory Board had devised a universal data capture spreadsheet that every pension scheme, every LGPS scheme could issue to their scheme employers. So employers are completing the same spreadsheet for each of their funds, because some employers will have employees across multiple funds. But again, we need to make sure that's the most efficient method of receiving this information. So moving on, another big area we'll have to resolve is member communication and employer engagement, particularly around the aspect of collecting hour changes that we may not hold. We fed into our consultation response some questions back to MHCLG as to the priority, the responsibilities of the fund compared to that of the employer, to make sure we have the right hour changes, and what we should do if an employer fails to engage with us and or no longer exist, which is a reality in the LGPS scheme, where some employers go out of business or just cease to exist. What do we do about collecting hour changes from those employers? Hopefully we'll get some feedback from the consultation response, so that all the funds across the LGPS universe can act in the same way, so that it's sort of a clearer way to work. Staff training is going to be an issue, and that largely will depend upon the level of automation that we can receive from our administration system. Hayward's supply our administration system, and I believe they're working on this now. But what we need to be sure of is that we have the most efficient way of working with regards to this. We need to be, most efficient way would be able to process members in bulk rather than singly, because processing, how many did I say? 19,000, 13,000 scheme members individually could take some time. And we also need to know in what order to process those. Do we concentrate on active members, retired members, members that have died, members that have transferred out? Again, all that fed into our consultation response. also how long are we supposed to allow ourselves to do this? Is it going to be a year? Is it going to be several years, depending on the priorities? We just don't know. But what will be really key to this success of this exercise will be our administration system doing the bulk of the work. And if it doesn't, it could get quite costly and time consuming. And if it has to be done manually, which we're expecting in a few areas, which I've listed at the bottom of this table on page 88, areas such as annual allowance, lifetime allowance, pension sharing on divorce, transfers out, these all may need to be dealt with manually, again, which would require a certain skill set and also take some time to do manually as well. So it's a large and complex area. We need to start collecting the data over the next few months so that we're ready to implement the remedy when it's time. So plenty of work to keep us going, and lots of communications also with scheme members and scheme employers. We don't want to get scheme members' hopes up that they're going to be in for significant windfalls, but we also do need our scheme employers to be on side to provide the data that we need to do this work in an efficient manner. So any questions on that at all?
Anybody? No? Okay, thanks, Sharon. Move on, item 13, pension fund communication strategy. Corey, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So the strategy is brought before you today for post-scrutiny. This has been through the committee process already and has been approved by the committee. You may remember last year I brought a digital communication strategy to you, which focused on how we were looking to bring forward our electronic communications with our membership and our employers. The main change to the communication strategy itself has just been to slot that digital communication strategy in so they are now part of the same document rather than separate strategies. You can see that under section 2 where we've summarised what the changes are. What I've also put in the report was to give an update, because this was coming partway through the year rather than in March when we would have normally brought this report. I've given an update on some of the activities that have taken place from the communication plan itself. Given the conversation about the plan earlier on and the various dates slotted in for certain communications, as I'm sure you appreciate, we developed this plan at the beginning of the year with planned communications that we know about, but things do come up throughout the year and we react to those appropriately at the time and build in additional communications. So as you can imagine, over this period, there has been a lot of communications around COVID and how to keep in contact with us for members, with employers, just assuring them that work is carrying on as normal. We've also been developing the communications around this exit pay reform and the various other legislative changes that have come up in a period that we weren't necessarily expecting them to do so. So you may not see those items in the plan, but there have been communications happening around those activities. I don't have anything else to add to the report, but I'm obviously happy to take any questions or feedback on the communication strategy.
Anybody? I think I asked them all earlier. Martin.
Sorry. I think we dealt with my question earlier, so I'm fine with where we are now. Okay,
thank you, Corey. We'll move on to item 14, funding strategy statement. Corey again, please.
Yeah, thank you again, Chairman. So again, this is a document just being brought to you for post-scrutiny. This has again been approved by the Pension Committee. The reason for the update to the funding strategy statement at this time is to reflect some regulatory changes that came in since the last time we updated the strategy, which was in line with the valuation process. The government updated its regulations regarding the payment of exit credits to employers, not to be confused with the exit payment reform we've just been talking about. This is for employers that leave the fund and there is a surplus in their funding position. There was some rather blunt legislation previously that just declared that we had to pay an exit credit to that employer. Didn't allow us to take into account any risk-sharing arrangements that might have been in place between the contracting authority and that contractor, or any other items that might have contributed to that surplus that weren't a result of the contributions that the employer was paying in. We now have discretion under the regulations to determine whether an exit payment is payable, and if so, what the size of that payment should be. And that's not necessarily going to be the same as the size of the surplus in the funding position. So all we've done is add in our policy on that into the funding strategy statement, which you can see summarised in the report, and that just sets out the various different items that we'll take into account when assessing whether that exit payment is due to the exiting employer. I haven't got anything else to add to the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Anybody? No. Okay. Thank you, Corey.
Thank you, Chairman.
Move on. Item 15, data improvement policy. Joanne, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is a piece of pre-scrutiny where we haven't yet taken this to Pensions Committee, but we're taking it to bringing it to you for you to have a look at to see if you can suggest any improvements or make any recommendations to the quality of this policy. So this is a policy that actually already exists, has been in place since 2018, which is due a review because it's been in place for a little while and things change quite quickly, as we know, in the world of local government pensions. So what I've done in section 2 is detail the revisions that have been made to the policy. Yeah, they're all detailed there. I was just wondering if anybody has any improvements or suggestions for the policy.
Anybody? No. Okay. Thank you, Joanne.
Okay. So, I was just going to say that will be presented to the Pensions Committee at the December meetings for them to approve this policy and to enact it.
Thank you. Item 16, annual report and statement of accounts. Ben Barlow, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so this is for information only. This documents the annual report and the statement of accounts has been before Pension Committee and Audit Committee without any major issues or changes needed, which is always a good thing. If I just draw you to some of the highlights that are in these accounts this year, which is section 4 of my report. Only we're seeing a net decrease for the year, which is the fund's net assets falling from 2.4 billion, reflecting the financial situation brought about by COVID. We're actually performing quite well for 3 quarters of the year. Then that final quarter has obviously taken a bit of a dip in things. Contribution receipts have increased slightly from 107.3 million to 112.7 million. That's in line with membership, as we'd expect. Benefit payments have increased to 94.4 million from 89.7 million. Again, that is in relation largely to pensioner numbers we're seeing. That's sort of the controls and checks that we do to back up the numbers that we're looking at. Administration expenses, on the whole of it, they look a bit fruity in the actual report itself, but we have done analysis to see what's happened, and year on year, once we've done the analysis, it does look correct. What we've got is a slight timing issue between where we've released something and some parts of the admin costs are allocated slightly differently. We took a number of questions on that in Pension Committee, which we have provided an answer for and is available if you would want to see that. 1 year investment return was a net market loss of 104.2 million. Again, that is in relation to this final quarter, really, that we're seeing the effect of COVID. Investment income has also decreased from 45 million in 18-19. It was actually quite a high year. Usually you're seeing returns there around 30 million, which is what 19-20 is now showing. 19-20 is now showing. And final point I'll probably make is that the number of active employers is materially unchanged from the prior year, which is why you're seeing contributions and benefits aren't massively changed. With that in mind, I don't want to go into too much detail. I will say that the audit has gone quite well this year. We were hoping that the audit would be finished by now, in which case I could have brought you the auditing report, the audit accounting report, which is called the ISA 260. That basically says what their findings are on the audit. Now, they haven't quite finished it yet, but I have sort of been involved in it, and I can say that there's nothing material in there at the moment. They're happy that this document gives a true and fair reflection of the accounts, and that we are in line with the SIT for guidance. So no surprises I would expect from Audit, and they seem very happy with what we've done and what is within this document. With that in mind, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions? No?
Chairman,
Okay.
if I may just make one comment, which is just around the obviously those numbers are at the low at March 2020. Just as everything had crashed down, the fund has tracked up from a low of around 2.4 billion up to 3 billion now. Up to 2.8 billion. The funding level has gone up from 84 to 92.5%. So that just emphasises the recovery. And that's as at the end of the last quarter.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, move on. Item 17, the impact of structural changes within Northamptonshire on the pension fund. Mark, please.
Hey, thank you. So this is obviously a report we tried to take to committee, or we tried to take a report like this to committee in March. That particular committee was cancelled. So what we did is we refreshed the report to bring it completely up to date, and that's what you have before you. It's emphasises some of the points that have already been mentioned, really. So I won't overly dwell on it. West Northamptonshire are going to be the new administrative authority, subject to formal ratification by government, which comes in this order which wraps up all of the, if you like, the ancillary stuff in one go. What the report is trying to do is obviously give assurance of the project that is underway, the work that is taking place around things like governance, to make sure that there is an appropriate committee structure, a re-establishment of a local pension board. The pension service itself will broadly lift and shift into the new authority. It's going to be based in Northampton, which is where everybody is centred at the moment. That doesn't perhaps feel that important in a remote working world, but I'm sure it will be, hopefully, in due course. Emphasising the fact there's a huge communication exercise, which we've touched upon a couple of times today already. But it's there's significant decisions for every individual, particularly if it takes 2 years for the reorganised authorities to fully form, because that means that's 2 years where members will need to to be thinking about the impact on their pensions. Data provision is one of our biggest risks. The largest employers in the fund are all being abolished. 2 new extremely large employers are being formed. That's 2 very, very significant data flows that we require of those scheme employers. So that's really important that is dealt with as well. And we've touched on resourcing as well. There's no doubt all of this activity is going to require some skilled officers' time. But I'll leave it there and throw it open to any questions that you may have on this report.
Anybody?
No, I think that's quite straightforward, really.
I think we've covered most important stuff earlier, Mark.
Yes, we did well.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, item 18, forward agenda plan. Joanne, please.
Hi, yeah, this is just to give you an idea of what will be coming up in future meetings. We try to stick to this as best we can, but sometimes we might have to postpone things if there's something significant happening, like exit cap, for example. Yeah, that's just for information.
Thank you. Anyone, any questions on that? Okay. We now come to the point where we need to move into private session, please, Paul. In respect to the following items, we're requested to resolve that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public was excluded from the meeting for the remainder of business on the grounds that if the public were present, it would likely be exempt information under Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Act. The descriptions against each item could be disclosed to them. Everyone okay with going into closed session?